learning from them. I have worked at the intersect of transport resilience and urban resilience. I come from a planning background and still learning from the people like you.
Perfect. Thank you everyone for your quick introductions. Snehal, I would want to start with you. Um, in fragile ecosystems like the Himalayas, where should a climate tech founder begin? Deep tech, field immersion, partnerships, raising funds, and where should they begin, and then what worked for you in your journey?
um, Without thinking, for sure, field immersion is someplace which you should begin with, because these are such complicated geographies in such fragile ecosystem. Unless and until you're present in it, you cannot fathom the amount of complexity that you will have to tackle to identify that, okay, where does technology actually make sense, and where you could have simple solutions which can really help combat some of these challenges. So I mean, for anyone, not just in Himalayan ecosystem, but I would say anyone working for earth or natural ecosystems, or for example, any problem statement would really first do the field immersion. That's something we've seen in water or water in general, and then all the states and countries that we've been working in right now. Yeah, I just wanted to keep it short. Yeah.
No, that works. Yeah, that's very to the point, and I think that's so maybe in a nutshell, where the consumer is, you
Yeah.
should begin from there,
Yeah.
and then work outwards from there.
Be near to the problem and to your client or consumer. And those working in climate space, I think it becomes imperative for all of us to see some of these fragile ecosystem from first person lens.
Right. Perfect. Thank you for that, Snehal. Moving to you, Prakhar. In Himalayan infrastructure planning, what is the most common resilience gap you see at the design stage?
So there are three layers to it. One would be the fragmented risk assessments. So all the departments have already done some sort of risk assessments, but they are moving in silos. What we need to do is to learn each one of them and bring them together in one room and say what you have done and we want to learn from it. Second would be the current risk assessments are being done from a historical data point of view. We are not incorporating the IPCC scenario 2030, 2060, 2080 ones. And we need to understand what are the cascading effects. For example, we have talked about historical landslide data, historical rainfall data, but have we seen the number of cloud bursts going less? No. So we need to learn from them, and it can lead to different hazards as well. That is where the multi-hazard risk assessment comes on, and we need to know about it and plan in a better way to incorporate that. And the third point would be to bring departments and making departments more resilient towards it. On they should know on, for example, a junior engineer sitting on a landslide incident site, he should know what to do, and bringing tech together rather than just keeping ourselves limited to GIS and traditional for techniques. We should also talk about AI, which is taking even lesser time and making your time consuming more efficient. And rather than let's say if you are taking 3 weeks to do a HVRA, you can do it in 1 week itself, and then you can plan better.
Thank you for sharing that, Prakhar. Samyak, my question for you in how do you start, and when you're entering in this climate resilient infrastructure, uh, you are you're very heavy in infrastructure, right? Uh, when you are deploying climate aligned infrastructure in underserved regions, what was your toughest early stage barrier? Capital, regulation, demand, and also when you started your journey, specifically targeting only the northeast region, right? It's a very difficult terrain to start. So, why did you do that? Opportunity, or some other purpose that drove you there, but what is it? And then how do you really navigate in such a tough terrain?
Thanks, Kamna, for that question. Coming to the first part of your question, I think the toughest thing for me, for A plus charge for that matter, was demand. So Northeast, for that matter, has always been 2-3 years behind rest of the country in terms of adopting new technology, in terms of bringing in more better resources, something like that. So demand for sure was my biggest issue, my biggest problem at that time. um, Even today, if I talk about EV penetration in Northeast, while the rest of the country, India is at about 5 to 6% EV penetration in terms of four wheelers, Northeast is at 2% today. So there's a gap that needs to be closed. This is essentially why I chose Northeast as the as the target market for A plus, because while there are companies building, charging infrastructure has to come before EVs are adopted. That is for sure. So while there are companies building in rest of the country, there was essentially no one doing it in the Northeast, and that is what really pushed me to pick it up in that region. Uh, it's very difficult in terms of the terrain. Of course, we have to manage. People often talk about not having enough EVs in hilly regions. Not able to People are not able to adopt EVs in the hilly regions because of the terrain and all of that. But we've seen it happen in Himachal Pradesh. Himachal, even the police has bought several EVs and they're using EVs for their daily operation. So that is one example I often give to my customers or the government in Northeast, in the hilly regions, because if the police can manage their operations with an EV, I'm sure anyone using an EV for 20-30 kilometers a day, they can do it. Yes. Yes, all in all, I think I've answered your question. Yes, done. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's a big opportunity. What I get out of it is a big opportunity to be in Northeast when no one else is looking at it, or few of us are looking at it. Some of us can really make a difference there.
Yes, exactly. Northeast, for that matter, I think with the infrastructure in place, I think that region is something. That region can actually replicate what was done in Kerala. If you look at Kerala, they had multiple charging stations coming up even before the EVs were there on the ground. So, and that is why Kerala is the leader in terms of four-wheeler EV penetration today. They're at 11% penetration. India is at 6, they're at 11. So that happened because of the charging infrastructure, and that is essentially what drove me there.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that, Samyak. For me, the key takeaway is, बहुत स्कोप है यहाँ पे काम करने का, so यहाँ करना चाहिए काम, है ना? Moving to you, Navya. I think even in our morning panel today, it was a lot of conversations were about how you communicate the urgency to the communities, or to the authorities or to the policymakers. How do you communicate that? And I often in my work talk about this कि लोग कहते हैं बातें करने से कुछ नहीं होता, but बिना बात करे भी कुछ नहीं होता. So communication plays a very critical role, and I think how what do you think about it? How can we communicate resilience to public entities? How can we drive that change with our communities? Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think storytelling and the right sort of communication in this space is extremely important. And since today we're talking about the Himalayan region, I feel there's a stereotype attached to every news that comes out when it's, about the Himalayan region. Not a lot of us know what all states actually constitute the Himalayan states, right? There's a lot of stereotype because when, say for example, Uttarakhand floods or Himachal Pradesh floods, we talk about it at length and there are videos going viral everywhere. But do we talk about Arunachal? Do we talk about the northeastern states? Not as much, because there's also this, tourism, there's a cultural, spiritual, religious tourism attached to the, to states like Himachal Pradesh and Uttarakhand, and they sort of closer to the national capital steal away all the spotlight. So I think that really is something that changes with the right sort of communication, right sort of storytelling. Also, I feel whenever we, work on reports when it comes to resilience, or even if reporting on climate and sustainability in general, I feel a lot of understanding just comes from jargons, and we try to move away from that, right? So say, for example, if I'm saying there's a project coming up in Himachal Pradesh that will consume 50 Olympic-sized pools worth of water. How big is an Olympic size pool? Do we know that? So something that we don't understand, we can't imagine, and we can't imagine the impact that it's going to create. I think all of that changes with responsible storytelling. Storytelling that sort of assumes that the audience is an eighth grader, right? And we want to break down all the information for them to understand in very easy words, in different languages that they know of. Because quite honestly, whether it's resilience, good news, bad news, information, we only care about it if it affects us. Or maybe at max, people around us. So there needs to be stories out there that affect you, that affect your livelihood, your community, and only then you would want to share it with others or do something about it.
I think what you rightly said about how you make it local to the community, so they understand in the language that they would want to, listen to, and I think that's a very key thing in how you communicate this. Thank you, Navya, for sharing that. Snehal, coming back to you, now that we have set up the context at how do we start, where do we start from in our own places, how do we scale in these fragile geographies, right? And you have built a company, a very young company going places now. What was your biggest barrier from moving from a proof of concept to institutional adoption? How did you do that? What were your barriers and things perhaps our audience can learn from? Uh,
Yeah, thank you for that question. So one thing for sure, when we are working on natural ecosystem, it's a public asset, common pool resource. So you have to work with communities. We do work with communities, but and these are the pilots or projects that you do with them, because you're also learning on fly with them how your technology is being adopted by them, and so you also learn, they also learn. But if you have to scale it up and institutionalize, that has to be done by government agencies, or you need to figure out a business model where you're not dependent on them, but in a way that communities, or you can figure out where the revenue is going to come from. So we had to think about both the aspects. One, pivoting on the business model, because one, for startups to have B2G clients is extremely difficult. Very difficult for us to work with them. Those are like one of the last clients you could think about working. Communities, although they would want to pay for services, but the margins are too low for them to also when they're de-risking it, at least take some cycles where they could have the capacity to pay for the services that you're planning to give to them. So we pivoted on our revenue models and figured out like, okay, can we have commercial models somewhere else, but at the same time communicate impact with while working with these communities. Institutionalization has to come from the government, especially when it comes to working in difficult geographies, and if you're working on, say, disaster preparedness or mitigation. That is where we still have a gap. It's not there, and it still is a barrier, but this is where innovation is helping, and now we're thinking about maybe different modes of engagement, bringing private capital and private movement, and government helps become a facilitator, and community becomes an adopter. So it's new ways of engagement, but then again, this has to be customized based on the geography or um, the challenge that, or the problem that you're trying to resolve at the core. This is what has been our experience right now.
Very
I'm
nice.
sure you might have a different experience in that.
Thank you, Snehal, for sharing that. I think for me, the hook was when you said government becomes a facilitator and communities become adopter, and you figure out and you pivot and you find your business model, because at the end of the day, you have to make revenues out of it, but also doing good work. Kudos to you for doing that. Um, Samyak, what was your experience in the same realm? How did you move from proof of concept to institutionalizing, what you're building?
Uh, so Kamna, I think for me, the proof of concept thing was more about having more utilization on my charging infrastructure. We installed one of our first DC chargers. We installed in Kaziranga National Park, and that was at a hotel. And initial, I think 6 to 8 months, I saw no traction at all. at that station, and that was really something that bugged my first angel investor, and we just had to do something to get revenues flowing from that station. So proof of concept happened 8 to 9 months after installing that station, because uh, when I was actually there and I spoke to one of my customers, and he told me कि ये नहीं होता तो मैं EV लेके नहीं जा पाता, and that was the spark that stuck with me, and we've moved on to 50 stations today, which is what actually drives me to the government and institutional and B2G, becoming a B2G supplier now. uh, yes, I think proof of concept happened that way. My stations were there, EV users are growing, and that is what actually drives me now.
Thank you, Samyak, for sharing that. Prakhar, I wanted to come to you and understand, what does it realistically take to move community level resilience models into district level, district or state level systems? Because you work a lot in disaster resilience, and then you work a lot with communities. You've worked for over 30 years now, very much rooted in the communities. Uh, how does that happen?
So it does happen in the way that any person which has joined Seas in the past 30 years has come from any of the projects which was done on ground. And any new person coming in has only one simple question he or she needs to ask is वो ऐसा कौन सा इंसान है जो सबसे अलग कुछ कर रहा है जिससे उसको कुछ हैम्पर नहीं हो रहा है. And we encourage that each one of us in the organization has to go on site to understand what the communities are doing, because we should understand that Himalayas are one of the youngest mountain ranges, and let's say GIS, climate change, these are things we're talking about last 50, 60 years. But community resilience has been there since a very long time, and it's a traditional knowledge. So how we can learn from them, and not only relying on them, but rather also how we can enable it and how we can add our input to it to make it more scalable. And of course, something which is the reason being what is being done in Leh is not replicable over in Uttarakhand because of community barriers and other changes as well, geography as well. And more about how to scale it from the government perspective is to codification and make it as a mandate, or like making changes in the building bylaws and how we can improve that and learning from them, and aligning our district disaster management plan, SAP CCs according to it and aligned with it, and how to scale them up and incentivizing the people. Until unless you won't be there on ground to know what people are vulnerable to, you will never understand what are the different vulnerabilities. For example, I was there 2 weeks back. I was in Uttarakhand, and I was hearing from a civil society organization that there is a bridge in a remote location of Uttarakhand, and it gets destroyed every monsoon season. But there are people who are trying to cross that mountain range, and even if there is a pregnant lady who needs to deliver, they are walking 9 kilometers on foot to provide the health facility to her. So that is the vulnerability which we are talking about, and which mostly goes unnoticed because we are relying on traditional ways if we are not on ground, and we cannot change systems during our ground. Scalability is not about replication but about institutional acceptance.
That's very heartwarming, just to see, what kind of realities we live in. We might sit here and have a fancy panel, but the realities are very different. But kudos to all of you, to just, I think when it starts from a place of experiencing it by yourself, and I think that's a great thing. I've spoken to a lot of your colleagues in the past, and that's what they've always shared, that someone who has lived that reality joins our team and then becomes a part of
Yes,
seats in
exactly.
the STS ecosystem. All right, moving on to you, Navya. How can storytelling help climate startups and resilience projects gain policy attention and investor trust? It's one thing that everyone needs more attention to the cause, to themselves, so they can scale their work. How can they do that?
So I think what investors really look for at the moment is impact. And that's what the audience also looks for, right? So whenever I've worked with startups, and there are three wonderful people sitting here who've done brilliant work in different capacities, but still solving one common problem. And that's exactly the power of storytelling, right? So I had a conversation with Snehal before the panel started, and she talked about how wonderfully she's working in, her company is working in Bihar. And my first takeaway was that a success story from Bihar rarely makes to the headlines. I mean, all we have is stereotypes, all we have is doom and gloom from Bihar, and I hate from Bihar. So, I mean, I'm always looking for positive news from that state. Having said that, like Prakhar mentioned, the kind of hiring that the company is doing is also equivalent to green jobs. These are the kind of stories that really need to be out there, and to celebrate how every company, every founder is adding so much to climate action apart from just one service or one product that they are making. Which is why we started a show to spotlight all of this. It's called Makers of New Bharat, where we celebrate what founders are doing. So today, for example, I'm working with a company that deals with measuring the carbon footprint of a company, which sounds very boring when you deal with regular audience, right? So they don't want to hear these kind of stories. They don't want to hear jargons, technical words. But the moment you tell the audience that, how you commute to office actually matters to your company, and this is how they can measure it, this is how you could be rewarded if it's eco-friendly, that's when it becomes a story. And I think that's exactly where it helps investors gain trust in the kind of policies and the kind of work that startups are doing, and also sort of prompt policymakers to act on it, because then startups and people demand action, and that comes from really understanding something deeply.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I think more of us that we talk about it, more stories, and like Snehal, and I would want you, Snehal, to talk more about your work in Bihar.
Yeah. I also wanted to just add on what Navya said, um, that communication, even from the investor side, is missing because they are not aware. There are good impact investors, but still at the end, conversation comes out, okay, how much are we making? What's your PAT? What's your EBITDA? And climate is a business case. It's no longer an externality, but I think where I can talk about myself as a tech startup, we fail to sometimes communicate through effective storytelling on the benefits of it. So we are very happy with impact, but like or revenue, either ways. But we fail to sometimes communicate, and that's where it helps because there's still a lot of education and awareness we need to build amongst the investor community who don't know why they should invest in some of these solutions. Do you feel that way as well?
So, for example, Samyak mentioned about Kaziranga. And I think even after this panel, if I don't remember what Samyak does and what the company does, I'll still remember the Kaziranga story, right? And the kind of impact they've been able to create, how it started off as a challenge but ended up being a success. I think that, and even what Snehal is saying, what investors really look for, of course, is the impact and what they're getting out of it. But again, that sort of changes with the right storytelling, because that's what eventually everybody wants. That's what eventually everybody is looking at, the real impact on ground, not just on paper. So that's why News with Navya really helps bring out these stories to the people.
Wonderful, yeah. I think yes, more advocacy and more conversations about it to make it mainstream, and that's exactly what we are also trying to do. It, acting as a bridge between all these innovations and investors. Um, I think as a end note of it, we are right there on time now. I just wanted to so I wanted to touch upon you are young leaders, and then we have a lot of Gen Z, and then yes, I've I've generalized you as young leaders, so let's be happy about it. So am I. But yes, if you talk about how the youth can, because there's a lot of youth which needs direction and which should innovate more in this space. Is there any advice, any ideas that these are the opportunities available in the Northeast or in in this region? Like we see a lot of innovations out here. There are people who are making things out of pine waste, and I have myself been very passionate about how pine waste really hurts our ecosystem. But then there are people who are actually making good things out of it. So if you have any message or any ideas or so that you would want to share with us, Now that you're in the thick of things, please, one last note, and then we'll open the panel for more questions from the audience. Yeah.
Okay. Well, not region specific, but I definitely feel and I've observed that the need for specialized skills, especially in earth sciences or humanities, is the requirement, because you cannot have AI replicating. For example, we don't have good ecologists and forestry or biologists are still required, because there's a lot of uncodified information and field information which no technology can replicate, at least till now. So the need for specialists coming from arts, humanities, earth sciences is going to increase, and I would say investing in that can really help.
Okay, so Kamna, what I think is I spent a lot of time with the startup ecosystem of Northeast, and there's a lot of conversation happening. Again, they're a bit behind in terms of if you compare the startup ecosystem of Northeast to that of Delhi or Mumbai or even Chandigarh or Pune for that matter. Um, there's a lot of conversation happening in that ecosystem. There are a lot of entrepreneurs coming in, coming up with good ideas, scalable ideas. Uh, I think they need some guidance. Of course, they need to personally, as startup founders, they need to go out more, go into the rest of the country and see what is happening, and also try to sell to the rest of the country. So if you're selling from Assam, if you're building in Assam and you're selling to the rest of the country, or you're building in Arunachal and you're selling to the rest of the country, that will make a lot of sense for them, because that is something that is not happening today. They're building in Arunachal probably for Arunachal. So that thought process needs to come up. Of course, go out and speak to more people. हल्ला मचा दो क्या कर रहे हो उससे ज़्यादा तो आई डोंट थिंक एनीथिंग वर्क्स मोर देन दैट थैंक यू
I think climate in general is a very broad topic and a very big domain, right? And there's so much happening in this space, which is why I feel young founders, and not just founders, like people working for companies as well, employees as well, should focus on solving one problem, right? So even when we attend summits like these, we don't attend all the panels. We try and pick and choose what really interests us. So for people who are just beginning their journey in this space, I think it's extremely important for them to just pick and choose what really feels interesting to them, explore in that space, and then pick a career. Because whether or not we accept, every job will be a green job in the future. So it's extremely important for people to be aware. And I think second most important thing is a lot of innovation and a lot of technology that's coming in this space at the moment is just repackaged, and it was actually very close to our ancient wisdom. So I feel go back to your culture, go back to your roots, explore how things worked then, and then sort of innovate and build on those lines. So that's something that the younger generation or our generation really needs to do.
Yeah, what I would like to add is, as Samik rightly said, that one should always get a mentor. A mentor just does not help you achieving your goals, but also address and has those values of what you need to do and how you want to solve the bigger problem. And one other thing is that while you develop the problem, don't just sit in silence and this is the problem. Rather than put your feet on ground, meet people, be it government, be it civil societies, be it communities, of what are the problems they are having, and then find your niche of what you want to do. And simultaneously, while solving those problems, don't. I was very young when I joined this, and I'm still very young. I would say that. Sorry, Kamna, but when I joined, I was going for big vocabulary words and big words rather than simplify it down. And I had the conversation with my mentor, and he told me, talk about and talk like how you would explain it to a 7-year-old, and this will solve your problem. And that's how you need to roll.
Absolutely. I think piece of jewels here. A lot of ideas have come from our two sessions since morning. I think, there's so much that we can do. There are so many resources that are available. and then there are so many problems and challenges which could be locally solved. And then I think one thing with Samek, you rightly said, if you are building from anywhere in our country today, we should not just sell it only in that particular part of our country today. Moving beyond, not just in the Himalayan region, but across the country. And I think Snehal, you have worked it phenomenally well. You are selling in 7 to 8 countries now. I think that's what we do. We build from India to the world, and we kind of make it as a very sample ecosystem that which could be replicated in other rough terrains. So if you're talking about the mountains region today here, can these solutions also be adopted in other mountain regions across the world? I think those are the kind of conversations that we try to also build at AndPurpose, that we can get more of these innovations right at the center of it, get them more to scale. And I think since morning this has been a good conversation, just to have the right people in the room, who are getting their hands dirty and solving the problems. So very, very thankful to all of you to come here and spare your time. It's been a very last minute everything from us at this end, but yes, thank you so much for coming in. And thank you so much to a very warm audience for joining us here. I know you have put your lunch on hold for us, so shows some commitment. But thank you so much for that. If anyone has any questions, we'll just yes.
Hello, everyone. Wonderful session. It was very insightful to hear from all of your perspectives. So I asked this question to a different panel yesterday, but I would also like your insight on this. So when we talk about climate action in particular, we often tend to see it as a non-for-profit. So as entrepreneurs yourself, what is that one advice you'd like to give to early stage startups to maximize the revenue while being an action player, like an active player in climate action? If you could throw some light on that.
So my answer to that would be, while most of the people talk about, as you rightly said, that not-for-profits are for climate action, but for-profits are also for climate action, as long as you are able to justify how you are going to bring a larger social impact on ground. Even if any person, any funder giving money to not-for-profit looks for what is the impact he or she is creating through the money, if you are able to justify it through your numbers, I don't think they will have a problem with you.
I think it's a very right answer, right question. Everyone looks at sustainability, climate as a very charitable space. Everyone looks at it as a good to have thing and not a must have thing. I think there are very fine examples of people who are actually making a living out of it, making good revenues out of it, making good profits out of it, and still creating impact at the ground. I think that thinking has to change. Anyone who's even at this point of time looking at it, from a lens that this is only for impact, this is only for charities, is perhaps having a very very small vision, because things have enormously changed. People are making phenomenal revenues. We run a network of startups in our ecosystem, and we have seen people, very fine examples, जिनके pre-seed rounds ही 100 crores plus के होते हैं. So this is something which is like a very big opportunity just lying with us. It's just how we now want to really act on it.
I think the storytelling would be an amazing initiative if used correctly. So yeah, would love to see more of that in future. Thank you.
Hello, I am Dr. Aparna. Appreciation to esteemed panelists as well as model. Wonderful session. A lot of take-home messages. But as a researcher, I just want to understand how you scout for technologies. What is your first step in that, and how do you approach where the technology exists? Because particularly in sustainable development, waste management, there are not many institutes or the technology right away available. So how do you actually scout for those technologies? Are there any central platform available where we can pick them?
Thank you for that question. I'll try to break it down in two parts. Scouting for technologies, I think there are good platforms now where you can see most of the innovation. For example, DST's website is good for some of the innovations that they have funded by rack calls and all. This is my guess. We specifically at NatureDots chose to work on one pain point of lack of climate data and water data at a hyper local or localized scale, and why people don't have accessibility to that. So we chose to work on that and then build our innovation on top of it. But if you're looking for like technologies on waste to wealth generation and circularity, I think some of these platforms of innovations in government, including some of the university platforms, could be a good go-to for credible innovations.
Because yeah, what I find is lacking is, so many universities have wonderful technologies, but they are not implemented either due to scalability or certain issues, because it is not only like you, if it's a manufacturing of some product, you just need to set up a factory kind of thing. But when you are working with climate ecosystem, there are so many stakeholders involved and you have to take them together. So there I feel some kind of linkages or bridge or some kind of facilitator would be important to take, or handhold all the stakeholders. So I mean, this
Very.
is just a thought that I thought
Yeah.
I must share.
I'm glad you asked that question. Ministry of Education runs a Ministry of Innovation cell, and if you're looking for ideas, which I think that's like a gold mine for a lot of us. If someone is building in this space or is looking for ideas, that what are the ideas where the government is also willing to pay for it, right? So MOE runs this program called Yukti Yojana, which is where student entrepreneurs across the country pick up these ideas, they innovate on it, and they build solutions on it. And of course, because these are student entrepreneurs, they don't have as much access to a lot of scale or funds or so. But these are like opportunities right there available, and these are like thousands of ideas. That is, I think, one go-to place for you to go to, and then do check out our work also at AndPurpose, because we are an ecosystem builder, especially in this space. It's very good for me. I'm just looking at what big a need it is that all of us want one place to go to where we can have, build our, make our tribe, meet more people, find the right resources. And that's where, that's the gap where we exist today. But yes, I think these two places you must go to, and that should hopefully help.
Thank you so much.
Any more questions from the audience? Yes, Ma'am, can you please?
Thank you. Firstly, thank you very much for this very powerful discussion. I've been following Navya and really happy to hear Kamna also. All of you are doing wonderful work. Back in 2010, I had quit IT, and with a dream to electrify my village in Bihar, I started working in the energy space. So I could relate to a lot of what all of you have been saying since morning. And even then, I find your ideas are quite something that can be adopted, and something that is still missing, whether it is the Northeast, whether it is the plains, or whether it is the southern India. What I'm really concerned about is that the whole trajectory and regime of funding has changed. After the Paris Agreement, that was a time when we used to have a lot of grants. But after the 2015 Paris Agreement, we have more transformed and translated towards market-based economy, wherein impact assessment has become an important element. Now, this is also the time when Government of India has come out with CSR policies, and public sector enterprises, the private sector has CSR policies. Now they look for impact in a 1 year of funding, right? But impact doesn't come in 1 year. When you are working with communities, it takes years, 4 years, 5 years. That's the minimum timeline that you need for impact. So how do you find the idea of storytelling? I personally find that the best way to communicate impact is through stories and not through numbers when you're talking about impacts, if you have a timeline of 1 year. So I would really like to have your comments, that what have been your experience. Have you also been talking to people who are working in CSR? How do they see storytelling vis-a-vis what you have been doing?
Right. I think that's an extremely important question, and all the companies that I've worked with, all the startups I've worked with, consistent storytelling really helps, right? So it cannot be like just 1 month of good storytelling that you've talked about a brand and you've talked about what they're building and that's about it. It needs to be consistent. It needs to go beyond reports that are online. It needs to go beyond, as you said, numbers and anything and everything that does not seem simple to a common reader or a viewer, right? And I feel stories also help in measuring the real impact. Say, for example, if there is an innovation or a technology in an agricultural space, right? So there's a technology that promises to reduce water usage. But how this has changed recently is that people and investors and a lot of viewers now want to know, does it really help the farmer? Does it increase their income or make their lives easier, right? So impact also has a different definition now. It's very inclusive. It talks about a lot of people who are a part of that particular story. So even in ways where, say, for example, a company has not been able to achieve something, I'm sure it has created impact in other domains, and that really needs to come out. That is where I think storytelling really helps. So whenever we work with companies, we look at a long-term storytelling where we're able to talk about, and we don't stick to social media formats only, because 3 minutes or 5 minutes is not decent enough to bring out somebody's story and their work. It does not do justice to them. But say, for example, today, if there's any story that has, stayed with you, say, for example, I keep coming back to Samyak for the Kaziranga story, but I think that's when you'll remember his work, and that's when you'll keep going back to see what impact is he creating now. So that's I think how responsible storytelling really measures impact beyond numbers.
Snehal, I would want you also to answer the same question, because I have seen your journey, and I feel you are not someone. I've not seen your social media very heavy, but when you yourself as a leader and then your company has gone through so many fellowships, won so many awards. How do you strike that balance, and what are the things that you're doing right?
Yeah. No. I also believe like now we need to think about new business models where you're not dependent on CSR or grant funds, because that money has just evaporated, and plus that means your business is always at disposable of somebody else giving you money, and it could be catalytic to initially in the journey, but then business models needs to become robust, and storytelling helps a lot over here, where you can create a business. For example, I always keep sharing this, that last year Uttarakhand floods contributed to millions of dollars of losses in infrastructure, human life, and business risks. And if you're able to put a dollar value sometimes to some of these extremities, it now suddenly becomes everybody to think about, rather than, okay, disasters happen. And the narratives are changing now. This is coming as much more robust business risk. So solutions working on some of these problems now suddenly becomes lucrative, because it is helping businesses reduce their operational risk, production risk, get more credit rating, etc., etc. So maybe thinking on that. Personally, for us at NatureDots, like we are still a startup, and startups are always resource hungry. So we chose to work more on these revenue and business models, create impact stories. For us, impact was by default, by design, but not the main thing to sell on. It was business returns, and impact is something you're going to get on top of that, which helped us navigate the conventional business ecosystem as well as the impact ecosystem. And social media is definitely really good, because now since we've done these deployments, we have content and we are learning on the fly how to communicate it better. But business sustainability comes first for any startup, I would say.
Perfect. Any more questions? Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here today. And I hope you have a rest of the evening as a good evening today, and see you soon again. Thank you for your time. Yes, and thank you so much for all of you to join us today.